Alice was beginning to feel very tired of sitting by her sister on the riverbank. The day was warm, the sky pale and quiet, and the book her sister was reading seemed to Alice to be entirely without pictures or conversations. And what, thought Alice, is the use of a book without pictures or conversations? She leaned her head against her hand, watching the slow movement of clouds above, her mind drifting between sleep and thought. Just as she was considering whether the pleasure of making a daisy chain would be worth the trouble of getting up, something quite extraordinary happened. A white rabbit ran close by her. There was nothing so very remarkable in that. Nor did Alice think it so very much out of the way to hear the rabbit say to itself, oh dear, I shall be late." But when the rabbit actually took a watch out of its waistcoat pocket and looked at it before hurrying on, Alice jumped to her feet in astonishment. Burning with curiosity, she ran across the field after it. The rabbit disappeared down a large rabbit hole under the hedge, and without a moment's hesitation, Alice went after it. The hole went straight on like a tunnel for some way and then dipped suddenly down. Alice found herself falling. There was plenty of time as she fell to look around her and wonder what was going to happen next. Down the sides of the well were cupboards and bookshelves. Here and there she saw maps and pictures hung upon pegs. She took down a jar as she passed. It was labeled orange marmalade, but to her disappointment it was empty. Down, Alice murmured. Will the fall never come to an end? She wondered how many miles she had fallen and whether she would pass straight through the earth and come out among people who walked with their heads downward. She tried to remember her lessons, but her thoughts drifted like feathers. At last, thump, thump. She landed upon a heap of dry leaves. She was not hurt at all. She stood up quickly and looked around. Before her was a long, low hall lit by a row of lamps hanging from the roof. There were doors all around the hall, but they were all locked. Alice tried every door, but none would open. Then she noticed a little three-legged table made of solid glass. Upon it lay a tiny golden key. Her heart leaped with hope. She tried the key in every lock, until at last it fitted a very small door hidden behind a curtain. Alice knelt down and looked through the door into the loveliest garden she had ever seen, bright flower beds, cool fountains, and winding paths under shining trees. "Oh, how I wish I could shut up like a telescope," she cried. Just then she noticed a little bottle on the table. Around its neck was a paper label with the words "Drink Me" printed beautifully upon it. Alice hesitated. "No wise little girl," she said to herself, "is going to drink from a bottle without knowing whether it is marked poison." But this bottle was not marked poison, so after tasting it carefully and finding it very pleasant, she soon finished it off. At once she began to shrink. Down she went, smaller and smaller, until she was only 10 inches high. Her face brightened when she remembered the little golden key. But when she reached the table, she found she had forgotten the key upon it, and now she was far too small to reach it. She sat down and cried. Her tears formed a pool around her, 4 inches deep and spreading across the hall. Soon she heard a pattering of little feet. The white rabbit was returning. In his hurry, he dropped his gloves and fan. Alice picked up the fan and gloves, hoping to return them. But as she fanned herself, she began growing smaller again. Afraid of disappearing altogether, she dropped the fan and soon found herself swimming in the pool of her own tears. "It is all very strange," she thought, "but I must be Alice still." Just then she heard a splash nearby. A mouse was swimming through the pool. Alice tried to speak to it, forgetting that mice do not generally enjoy being addressed. "Oh mouse, do you know the way out of this pool?" The mouse swam away from her in great alarm. Alice sighed. Wonderland, she began to understand, followed no rules she had ever learned. And yet, deep within her, curiosity burned brighter than fear. Somehow she felt certain this was only the beginning. Alice stood alone in the great hall, her small shoes resting upon the smooth marble floor, while the echoes of her own breathing seemed louder than the silence itself. The long table of glass was still before her, the little golden key now useless in her hand. The tiny door beyond it shimmered softly as though mocking her hopes. Only moments ago she had been tall enough to reach the key with ease. Now she was small again, small enough to peer through the door, yet far too small to open it. A tight ache settled in her chest. "Oh dear," Alice whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "What will become of me now?" She had never felt quite so confused. In her proper world, things behaved sensibly. People grew up, not down. Doors did not tease you. Bottles did not command you to drink. Yet here in Wonderland, nothing obeyed reason, and Alice was left to wonder whether she was the one who had changed the most. As the thought settled, her eyes filled with tears. At first, she brushed them away impatiently. Crying, she believed, would not help. But the feeling inside her swelled too quickly, and before she knew it, great tears began to fall, warm and heavy, spilling down her cheeks and onto the floor. "I wish I hadn't cried so much," she sobbed softly, though the tears continued regardless. They fell and fell until the marble beneath her shoes became slick and shimmering. Alice took a step backward and gasped. Water. The hall, once vast and empty, now held a glistening pool that stretched across the floor. Her tears had gathered into a small lake, rippling faintly beneath the light. "How very silly I am," she murmured, "to cry myself a sea." She wiped her eyes, but before she could regain her composure, something peculiar began to happen again. Her body tingled as it had before, her hands felt lighter, her feet no longer rested firmly upon the floor. Alice was growing, not slowly but swiftly. She shot upward like a rising tide, her head nearing the ceiling as her feet splashed into the pool below. The water climbed her dress, cold and shocking, and before she could catch her breath, she found herself floating. The great hall was gone. Now there was only water stretching around her like a silver mirror, her own reflection wavering upon its surface. Alice paddled awkwardly, trying to keep herself afloat. Though she was a good swimmer for her age, the suddenness of it all left her breathless. "This is dreadful," she thought. "I wish I were back at home, reading by the fire." As she drifted, she noticed movement nearby. Something dark bobbed in the water, drifting closer with gentle strokes. Alice blinked, then stared in astonishment. It was a mouse. A small, wet mouse swimming determinedly through the pool, its whiskers slicked flat against its face. "Oh," Alice exclaimed. "A mouse!" She hesitated only a moment before calling out, eager for company in this strange place. "Mouse, do you know the way out of this pool?" The mouse stopped swimming at once and turned toward her, its eyes sharp and startled. Alice suddenly remembered her French lesson. Perhaps it speaks French, she thought. "Où est ma chat?" she asked carefully. The mouse shrieked. With a splash, it darted backward, trembling violently. "Oh dear," Alice cried. "I beg your pardon, I quite forgot. You wouldn't like cats, would you?" The words seemed to strike the mouse like thunder. It swam farther away, bristling with fear. Alice felt terribly ashamed. "I didn't mean to frighten you," she said gently. "Please come back, I won't speak of cats again." After a cautious moment, the mouse edged closer. "It is very cold," it said stiffly, "and very wet." "Yes," Alice replied earnestly. "It is. I do wish we could get dry." As if summoned by her words, the water around them rippled, and soon Alice noticed more shapes emerging, creatures swimming toward them from all directions. A dodo appeared first, flapping useless wings atop the water. Then a duck paddled past, followed by a lory and an eaglet, all looking equally confused and miserable. "We must do something to dry ourselves," declared the dodo solemnly, "and I know the best way to do it." Everyone gathered around, forming a small floating circle. "The best way," the dodo continued, "is a caucus race." Alice blinked. "What is a caucus race?" The dodo did not answer directly. Instead, it marked out a rough circle in the water. "Everyone begins when they like," it said, "and stops when they like." Without further explanation, the creatures began running, or rather, splashing around in the pool. There was no start and no finish, no direction and no sense. Alice joined them, laughing softly despite herself. Round and round they went, water flying in every direction. After a long while, the dodo suddenly called out, "The race is over." Everyone gathered around Alice, dripping and breathless. "Who has won?" Alice asked. After deep consideration, the dodo announced, "Everybody has won and all must have prizes." Alice searched her pockets and found, to her relief, a small box of comfits. "Please accept these," she said shyly. The creatures received them with great delight, though Alice herself received nothing but applause. At last the mouse was called upon to speak. "Sit down, all of you," it said, "and listen to me. I will soon make you dry enough." Alice listened eagerly as the mouse began to recite a long, serious tale filled with kings, laws, and punishments. Though Alice tried her best to pay attention, her thoughts wandered. The words flowed over her like the water had before, important yet distant. She shivered slightly. "I'm still damp," she whispered. When the mouse finished, it noticed Alice's lack of enthusiasm and bristled again. "You are not attending." "I beg your pardon," Alice said quickly. "It's just very dry." The mouse huffed and turned away. Feeling lonely once more, Alice sighed. She wondered then, quietly, deeply, whether she was still herself at all. "Was I the same this morning?" she thought. "Or have I changed in the night?" She tried to remember her lessons, her home, her sister's voice. They felt distant, like memories from a dream. "If I'm not the same," she murmured, "then who am I?" The thought frightened her more than anything else in Wonderland. As she pondered, a sudden commotion arose nearby. The animals scattered as something large and bounding came toward them. It was a puppy, a very large puppy with enormous paws and bright, eager eyes. Alice's heart leapt. "Oh, how sweet!" she exclaimed. The puppy bounded toward her, splashing water everywhere. Alice laughed and ran, the creature leaping playfully after her. But she soon realized with a gasp that the puppy was far too large. One playful paw nearly knocked her over. "Oh no, no," she cried, darting behind a clump of grass. The puppy barked joyfully and bounded away at last, distracted by a stick. Alice collapsed onto the ground, breathing hard. "That was a narrow escape," she said softly. She brushed herself off and looked around. The world seemed quieter now, softer. Strange flowers whispered nearby and the path ahead shimmered invitingly. Alice rose to her feet. Though she was frightened, though she was uncertain, a small spark of determination glowed within her. "I will go on," she said firmly. "I will see this place through." With that, she stepped forward, curious, cautious, and just a little braver than before as Wonderland stretched endlessly ahead. The forest was strangely quiet. After the confusion of the pool and the chattering animals, the silence felt almost heavy, as if Wonderland itself were holding its breath. Alice walked slowly between the tall trees, their trunks twisting upward like question marks, their leaves whispering secrets she could not understand. The ground beneath her feet was soft, springy, and warm, and shafts of golden light filtered through the branches above. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called out, not a familiar birdsong, but something sharper, almost laughing. Alice clasped her hands in front of her and sighed. "Oh dear," she murmured, her voice small in the wide forest. "I wonder what sort of place this is." She had grown used to feeling confused, but loneliness was harder to bear. The animals from the pool were gone, scattered by fear and misunderstanding, and now she walked alone again, unsure of which direction was right, or whether such a thing even existed in Wonderland. As she wandered, Alice noticed something peculiar. Though the forest seemed vast, she herself felt smaller. Not in size, for she remained comfortably her proper height, but in importance. Everything around her felt larger than it should, as if Wonderland did not care whether she was there at all. She paused beside a thick tree whose bark was patterned like scales. "Perhaps I should talk to myself," she said aloud, trying to feel braver. "That usually helps." But before she could continue, a voice answered her. "That depends very much on what you intend to say." Alice spun around. There, perched lazily on a low tree branch, was a cat. At least it was a cat's head and shoulders, floating in midair as though the rest of its body had forgotten to exist. Its fur was striped in soft shades of purple and gray. and its eyes, large, bright, and unmistakably amused, watched Alice with calm curiosity. The cat smiled, not a polite smile, not a friendly one, but a slow, wide smile that seemed to stretch far beyond its face. Alice stared, her heart pounding. "Oh," she exclaimed. "A cat!" The cat's smile widened. "That is usually what I am called," it replied. Alice gathered her courage. After all, Wonderland had taught her that nothing was gained by screaming. "Would you tell me, please," she said carefully, "which way I ought to go from here?" The cat tilted its head. "That depends a good deal on where you want to get to." Alice hesitated. "I don't much care where," she admitted. "Then it doesn't much matter which way you go," said the cat. Alice frowned. "So long as I get somewhere." "Oh, you're sure to do that," the cat said calmly, "if you only walk long enough." The words echoed strangely in Alice's mind. They felt true in a way she couldn't explain. She glanced around the forest. What sort of people live about here? The cat's tail appeared suddenly, flicking lazily behind it. "In that direction," it said, nodding with its chin, "lives a hatter, and in that direction, nodding the other way, lives a hare. Both are mad." "But I don't want to go among mad people," Alice said quite firmly. "Oh, you can't help that," said the cat. "We're all mad here. I'm mad, you're mad." Alice shook her head. "How do you know I'm mad?" "You must be," said the cat, "or you wouldn't have come here." Alice did not know what to say to that. Before she could think of a reply, the cat began to fade. First its tail vanished, then its body, then its head, until only the smile remained, hanging in the air like a crescent moon. Alice stared at it, feeling a strange mixture of amusement and unease. "I've often seen a cat without a grin," she whispered, "but never a grin without a cat." And then the smile, too, faded away. Alone again, Alice stood quietly, listening to the forest breathe. She thought of the cat's words, "We're all mad here." Perhaps madness in Wonderland was simply another way of being alive. After a moment's thought, she decided to walk toward the direction the cat had indicated first, the path leading to the Hatter. Curiosity, after all, had always guided her better than fear. The forest thinned as she walked, opening into a clearing where a small house stood crookedly among the trees. Smoke curled from its chimney, drifting in oddly shaped loops. As Alice approached, the air grew thick with strong smells, pepper, herbs, and something sharp that made her eyes water. She knocked hesitantly on the door, no answer. She knocked again, still nothing. So gathering her courage once more, Alice pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was chaos. A woman sat near the hearth, stirring a large pot with fierce determination. Clouds of pepper filled the air, making Alice cough. The woman's expression was sharp and tired, her movements abrupt. Beside her, a baby lay cradled in her arms, wailing loudly. And perched on a stool nearby was a large cat, grinning. It was the same cat from the forest. The Duchess turned and glared at Alice. "What are you staring at?" she demanded. "And nothing," Alice stammered. The baby sneezed violently. "Pepper," shouted the Duchess. "There's too much pepper in the soup." She shook the pot furiously, sending another cloud into the air. Alice's eyes burned and she struggled to breathe. The baby howled even louder, its cries sharp and piercing. The cat only grinned. "Please," Alice said timidly, "might I ask why your cat grins like that?" "It's a Cheshire cat," the Duchess snapped. "And that's why." She rocked the baby roughly, humming a strange lullaby that sounded more like a threat than a song. Each verse ended with a sharp shake, making Alice wince. "Speak roughly to your little boy," the Duchess sang, "and beat him when he sneezes." Alice felt her heart ache. This was not the warmth of home. This was something harsher, stranger, a place where comfort had twisted into cruelty. Suddenly, the Duchess thrust the baby into Alice's arms. "Here," she said, "you can take it. I've got to get ready to play croquet with the Queen." And without another word, she stormed out of the house. Alice stood frozen, holding the crying baby. "Oh dear," she whispered, "what am I to do with you?" The baby continued to wail, its cries growing deeper, rougher. Alice looked down and gasped. The baby's face was changing. Its nose stretched forward, its ears shifted upward. Its body grew longer and heavier in her arms. Alice stumbled backward in shock as the baby squirmed, then slipped from her grasp and landed softly on the floor. Where the baby had been, a small pig now stood, blinking in confusion. It snorted once, then scampered out the door and vanished into the forest. Alice sank into a chair, her heart racing. That was very odd, she said faintly. The Cheshire Cat reappeared on the hearth, watching her calmly. Did you notice, it said, that the Duchess is very fond of morals? Alice blinked. Morals, everything has a moral, said the cat, if only you can find it. Alice wasn't sure she wanted to. She thanked the cat politely and stepped back outside, grateful to breathe fresh air again. The forest seemed gentler now, as though it approved of her escape. As she walked, Alice felt something new stirring within her. She was no longer simply frightened. She was learning that Wonderland did not follow rules but patterns, that logic bent but did not entirely break, that confidence, even quiet confidence, mattered. She thought again of the Cheshire Cat's smile, of the Duchess's strange cruelty, of the baby that had become a pig. Perhaps Wonderland was not mad. Perhaps it was honest in a way the real world was not. As she reached the edge of the forest, Alice could hear distant laughter and the clinking of teacups. A long table stretched beneath the open sky ahead, and though she did not yet know it, Alice was walking straight toward one of the strangest gatherings Wonderland had to offer. The world, it seemed, was about to grow even madder, and for the first time Alice did not turn away. She walked on. The tree stood alone in a clearing, its branches bent low as though whispering secrets to the ground. Beneath it was set a long table, crooked and mismatched, stretching farther than seemed reasonable for such a quiet forest. Teacups and saucers covered its surface in wild disarray, piled upon one another as if no one had ever bothered to finish a single cup before reaching for the next. Alice slowed her steps. There was something about the scene that unsettled her, not with fear, but with curiosity so sharp it tugged at her chest. Steam drifted lazily upward from several teapots, though no fire warmed them. The air smelled faintly of bergamot and something older, something stale. At the table sat 3 figures. One wore a tall hat, battered and stained, with a card tucked into its band. Another slouched beside him, ears long and drooping, eyes restless and glassy. Between them, half asleep and breathing softly, lay a small brown creature curled like a cushion. The sight was so strange that Alice stopped altogether. No room. No room, cried the man in the hat suddenly, though Alice had not yet come near enough to touch the table. But there's plenty of room, Alice said, stepping closer despite herself. The man, who would later introduce himself as the Mad Hatter, stared at her with pale, unblinking eyes. The March Hare snorted loudly and shoved a teacup off the table for no reason at all. Then sit, said the Hatter, gesturing vaguely to a place that was already occupied by crumbs, spoons, and a watch submerged in tea. Alice hesitated only a moment before sitting down. The Dormouse stirred, opened one eye and muttered something about treacle wells before sinking back into sleep. You'll want a cup, the March Hare said, pushing one toward her. The cup was cracked and empty. I don't see any tea, Alice said politely. Then you shouldn't be asking for it, the Hatter replied sharply. I wasn't asking, Alice said, confused. Good, said the March Hare. We hate questions. The Hatter leaned closer, his face suddenly serious. Why is a raven like a writing desk? Alice blinked. I don't know. Excellent, the Hatter said, clapping his hands. Neither do I. They all stared at her expectantly, as though she were meant to say something more. Alice waited. Nothing happened. This is the strangest tea party I've ever been to, she said at last. You've been to others? The March Hare asked, astonished. Of course, said Alice. At home. Well, the Hatter said sadly, that explains it. He pulled a watch from his pocket and peered at it. Alice noticed it had no hands, only a painted face with tiny teacups instead of numbers. It's always 6 o'clock, the Hatter announced. And that, said the March Hare, is why we never wash the cups. They all shifted down the table at once, leaving Alice momentarily behind. She scrambled to follow, knocking over a teapot as she went. Why is it always tea time? She asked, trying to keep up. The Hatter sighed deeply. Time and I had a disagreement. The March Hare nodded gravely. "A terrible disagreement. I was singing at a concert for the Queen of Hearts," the Hatter continued, "and she accused me of murdering the time." "I didn't," Alice protested. "Not you," the Hatter snapped. "Time. And since then," the March Hare added, "time won't do a thing I ask. So it's always tea time," Alice said softly. "Yes," said the Hatter, "and we move around the table when the cups get dirty." "And never reach the end," said the Dormouse suddenly without opening its eyes. Alice felt a strange tightness in her chest. For all their silliness, there was something lonely about them, forever circling the same moments, never moving forward. "That must be very tiring," she said gently. The Hatter looked at her as though no one had ever spoken kindly to him before. "Tiring," he repeated. "No, time is tired of us." They fell silent for a moment, broken only by the clink of spoons. Then the Hatter turned sharply. "Tell me a story." "I don't know one," Alice said. "Then wake the Dormouse," said the March Hare. Before Alice could object, the hare grabbed the Dormouse and dipped its nose into a teacup. The Dormouse spluttered awake. "Once upon a time," it began sleepily, "there were 3 little sisters, Elsie, Lacey, and Tilly, who lived at the bottom of a treacle well." "What did they live on?" Alice asked. "Treacle," said the Dormouse. "But they'd be ill," Alice said. "They were," said the Dormouse. "Very ill." Alice frowned. The story made no sense at all, yet she found herself listening intently as though the meaning hovered just beyond her reach. "And what happened next?" she asked. The Dormouse yawned. "They were learning to draw." "What did they draw?" Alice asked. "Treacle," said the Dormouse again. "That's not much of a story," Alice said, disappointed. The Dormouse fell asleep instantly. The March Hare sighed. "Stories never end properly here." Alice stood up. "I think I'll go," she said firmly. "No riddles solved?" the Hatter asked. "None," Alice said. "Then you've had the full experience," he replied cheerfully. As Alice walked away, she glanced back once more. The 3 figures had already shifted seats again, pouring tea into cups that overflowed onto the ground. The forest seemed quieter as she moved farther from the clearing, yet Wonderland felt louder inside her thoughts. She had begun this journey bewildered and frightened, shrinking and growing at the mercy of strange rules she did not understand. But now she felt something different. Curiosity remained, but fear had softened. The madness no longer pushed her away. Instead, it revealed itself, absurd, endless, and somehow fragile. Alice paused beside a large rose bush, its thorns sharp and its blooms painted hastily in red. In the distance, she could hear voices shouting orders. A new presence waited ahead, one that would not play with time or riddles. Alice straightened her back. "If this is a world of nonsense," she said quietly to herself, "then I will meet it sensibly." And with that, she stepped forward toward the sound of trumpets, toward authority and chaos, toward the next turning of her strange and wondrous journey. The rose garden lay before Alice like a painted dream, neatly trimmed hedges, winding paths, and roses so red they seemed almost unreal. Yet something about the scene felt strangely tense, as though the air itself was holding its breath. 3 playing card gardeners stood near a rosebush, hastily brushing red paint over white roses. Their movements were frantic, their gloved hands trembling as they worked. Alice watched them for a moment, curiosity tugging at her once more. "Why are you painting those roses?" she asked gently. The gardeners froze. One dropped his brush. Another glanced nervously over his shoulder, as if expecting punishment to fall from the sky. "Hush," whispered the first. "If she hears you, who?" Alice asked. Before an answer could come, the sound of trumpets blared through the garden. It was loud, sharp, and commanding, echoing against the hedges like a royal summons. The gardeners immediately threw themselves flat on the ground. Alice turned just in time to see a procession approaching. A grand parade of cards marching in pairs, carrying banners, instruments, and cushions. At the center of it all walked the Queen of Hearts. She was magnificent and terrifying all at once. Her crown sat crooked upon her head, her gown billowed like a storm cloud, and her eyes flashed with fierce authority. Beside her strode the King of Hearts, small and timid, clutching his robe and glancing anxiously at his queen. "Off with their heads!" the queen shouted suddenly, pointing at a group of unfortunate cards who had stumbled out of line. The condemned cards vanished instantly, dragged away without protest. Alice felt a chill crawl down her spine. "This place is more dangerous than I thought," she realized. The procession halted near the rose garden. The queen's sharp gaze swept across the scene, landing on the freshly painted roses. "Who did this?" she demanded. The gardeners trembled violently. It was us, your majesty," one stammered. The queen raised her scepter. "Off with, please," Alice burst out, unable to remain silent. "It was only a mistake." Every head turned toward her. The queen stared at Alice, eyes narrowing. "And who are you?" Alice curtsied, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "I'm Alice." "Are you important?" the queen asked. Alice hesitated. I don't think so." The queen considered this for a moment, then shrugged. "Very well, spare them, we have a game to play." Relief washed over the gardeners as they scrambled away. "Croquet," the queen announced. The croquet ground was unlike anything Alice had ever seen. Instead of mallets, the players used live flamingos. Instead of balls, curled hedgehogs rolled and unrolled as they pleased. And the hoops, well, they were soldiers bent into arches, often straightening themselves just as the ball approached. The queen played furiously, shouting orders, accusing everyone of cheating and sentencing players left and right. "Off with his head." "Off with her head." "Off with," Alice tried to play, but the flamingo refused to cooperate, twisting its neck and staring back at her with offended eyes. The hedgehog escaped twice. Nothing stayed still long enough to be played properly. Yet as the chaos swirled around her, Alice felt something shift inside herself. She was no longer shrinking with fear, she was growing inside. The queen stomped toward her. "You're not playing fairly." "But nobody is," Alice replied calmly. The queen blinked, clearly unused to being answered. Before she could respond, a familiar grin appeared in the air beside them. The Cheshire Cat slowly materialized, floating above the croquet ground, his smile wide and knowing. "Do you know that cat?" the queen demanded. "Yes," Alice said. "He's a friend." The queen scowled. "I don't like the look of him." "Then have him removed," the king suggested weakly. "Off with his head," the queen shouted. The cat merely laughed. "You can't cut off a head that isn't attached to a body," he said cheerfully. Indeed, only his head floated there. The executioner arrived, arguing with the king, the queen, and the cat all at once. No one could agree on how to proceed. Alice watched the ridiculous scene unfold, realizing something important: they aren't powerful, they're just loud. Eventually, the queen grew tired of the argument. "Let's move on," she declared. "I want to show our guest the griffin." The griffin sat at the edge of the sea, a strange creature with the body of a lion and the wings of an eagle. Beside him sat the mock turtle, who looked deeply sorrowful, sighing as if his heart were permanently broken. "This is the mock turtle," the queen said. "Tell her your story." The mock turtle sighed again. "Once I was a real turtle." He spoke of strange schools, lessons called reeling and writhing, and dances beneath the sea. His words drifted like memories, heavy with longing and sadness. Alice listened quietly, feeling sympathy for the gentle creature. Suddenly the queen clapped her hands. "That's enough, time for the trial." The courtroom was vast and crowded, filled with animals, birds, and cards packed tightly together. At the front sat the king and queen upon their thrones. The knave of hearts stood accused of stealing the queen's tarts. Alice found herself growing again, larger and larger, until she nearly filled the room. She wasn't frightened this time, she was steady. Witnesses were called. None made much sense. The Mad Hatter appeared, nervously sipping tea and confusing everyone with his answers. The Duchess argued loudly. The evidence was nonsense. Finally, the queen turned to Alice. "What do you know about this?" she demanded. "Nothing," Alice replied honestly. "That's very important," said the king, jotting it down. The queen glared. "Sentence first, verdict afterward." "That's not the way things work," Alice said firmly. The room fell silent. The queen's face flushed with anger. "Off with her head," Alice laughed, not mockingly but with sudden clarity. "You're nothing but a pack of cards," she said. At once the court rose into the air. Cards fluttered everywhere, swirling toward Alice in a storm of paper and chaos. She raised her arms and woke up. She lay beneath a tree, sunlight filtering through leaves above her. Her sister sat nearby, reading quietly. Alice blinked, heart racing. "Why, you've been asleep a long while," her sister said with a smile. Alice sat up slowly, the echoes of Wonderland still warm in her mind. The queen, the cat, the tea party, the garden, it all felt distant yet meaningful. As she gazed at the sky, Alice smiled softly. Though she had awakened, she knew something precious remained with her: curiosity, courage, and the quiet magic of a world that lived just beyond the edge of imagination. The courtroom of Wonderland was vast, yet strangely hollow, as though it existed only because someone believed it should. Tall pillars stretched upward into nothingness, dissolving into mist before they could meet a ceiling. Rows of creatures filled the benches, animals, cards, and curious beings whose shapes wavered as if they were ideas rather than flesh. At the center of it all sat the Queen of Hearts. She loomed upon her throne, red robes spilling like fresh paint across the steps, her crown crooked with impatience. The King of Hearts sat beside her, smaller, quieter, clutching a scroll as though it might protect him. Around them stood the court, soldier cards stiff and silent, their painted faces unchanging. Alice stood near the witness stand, her hands folded tightly before her, her heart beating louder than the murmurs of the room. "This is the trial of the Knave of Hearts," declared the White Rabbit, nervously adjusting his spectacles. "He stands accused of stealing the Queen's tarts." A tray of golden pastries sat nearby, glowing unnaturally bright, as if demanding attention. The knave stood in chains, looking more confused than guilty. He stared at the floor, then at the Queen, then back at the floor again, as though hoping the whole business might dissolve if he refused to understand it. "Sentence first," the Queen shouted suddenly. "Verdict afterward." A ripple of unease passed through the courtroom. "That's not how trials work," Alice said before she could stop herself. All eyes turned toward her. The Queen's face darkened. "Who asked you?" Alice swallowed, but her voice did not tremble. "I only meant it would be better to hear the evidence first." The King cleared his throat nervously. "Yes, dear, perhaps." "Silence!" cried the Queen. "Bring in the first witness." The White Rabbit scurried forward, holding a trumpet nearly as large as himself. He blew it with all his might, producing a sound that echoed too long, too loud, as though the walls themselves were startled. The first witness stumbled in. It was the Mad Hatter. He wore the same battered hat, the same wild eyes, though today his movements seemed slower, less certain. He bowed awkwardly to the court. "Do you know anything about these tarts?" the King asked. The Hatter blinked. "About time," he said. "Time doesn't know anything anymore." The Queen frowned. "Answer the question." "I was at tea," the Hatter continued, waving his hands vaguely. "Always at tea. There's never time for anything else." His words twisted around themselves, offering sound without meaning. The courtroom grew restless. "Off with his," the Queen began. "No," Alice said sharply. The word rang through the room, clear and steady. For the first time the Queen hesitated. Alice felt something shift within her, like the settling of a puzzle piece. She was no longer shrinking or growing without reason. She stood firmly on her feet, her size steady, her thoughts clearer than they had ever been in Wonderland. "This trial makes no sense," she said. "You're asking questions without listening to the answers. You're accusing without proof." The Queen rose from her throne, her face burning red. "You dare challenge me?" Alice met her gaze. "I dare tell the truth." The courtroom murmured again, louder this time. The creatures shifted, whispering, glancing at one another as though they too were beginning to question the rules they had always followed. The King fumbled with the scroll. "Perhaps we should read the evidence," he said weakly. The White Rabbit brought forward a slip of paper. The King peered at it. "It seems to be a poem." He read aloud, his voice uncertain. The words tumbled over one another, vague and meaningless, accusing without naming, condemning without clarity. "That proves his guilt," cried the Queen triumphantly. Alice shook her head. It proves nothing at all. She stepped forward, feeling taller not in body but in spirit. You're nothing but a pack of cards. For a moment the world froze. The queen screamed. The soldiers lunged forward, but as they did, their stiff forms faltered. The edges of the courtroom blurred. The pillars melted into mist. The benches collapsed into scattered leaves. The cards rose into the air, swirling wildly, faces spinning, red and black flashing like startled birds. Alice lifted her arms instinctively, shielding her face. The world rushed outward, unraveling itself thread by thread. The queen's voice dissolved into echoes. The courtroom fell away like a dream that could no longer hold its shape. And then silence. Alice opened her eyes. She lay beneath a tree, sunlight flickering through green leaves above her. The warm earth pressed gently against her back. A soft breeze stirred the grass around her, carrying the scent of summer and distant flowers. For a moment she did not move. The dream clung to her like mist, fading slowly, reluctantly. The queen's shouts echoed faintly in her memory. The Cheshire cat's grin hovered at the edge of her thoughts. The white rabbit's hurried footsteps seemed to linger just beyond hearing. "Why, you've been asleep," said a familiar voice. Alice turned her head. Her sister sat beside her, a book resting in her lap, her expression calm and fond. "You were dreaming so deeply, I didn't like to wake you." Alice sat up slowly, brushing leaves from her dress. The world felt solid, comfortingly so. The sky was a clear blue, uninterrupted by floating teacups or grinning cats. Birds sang from the branches above, real and ordinary. "I had the strangest dream," Alice said softly. She began to tell her sister everything. The fall down the rabbit hole, the shrinking and growing, the tea party frozen in time, the queen's fury, the trial that made no sense at all. As she spoke, the images returned vividly, shimmering with impossible color and emotion. Yet with every word they felt a little farther away, as though Wonderland were retreating into a hidden corner of her heart. Her sister listened without interrupting, smiling gently. When Alice finished, she fell silent, gazing out across the meadow. The world seemed both smaller and larger than before, smaller because it was familiar, larger because she now knew how wide imagination could stretch. "Perhaps dreams are like that," her sister said at last. "They show us things we might not otherwise see." Alice nodded. She felt a quiet warmth inside her, a sense of having traveled far and returned changed. As the afternoon wore on, Alice wandered away, her thoughts drifting like clouds. Her sister remained beneath the tree, watching her go. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the quiet hum of the countryside surround her. And in that stillness she imagined Alice grown older, still curious, still brave, carrying the memory of Wonderland with her through the years. She imagined Alice sharing stories with children of her own one day, telling them of a place where logic bent, where courage mattered, where a young girl learned to speak when silence was easier. The vision faded gently, like the closing of a book. Alice returned, her steps light. "Shall we go home?" she asked. "Yes," her sister replied, standing. "It's getting late." They walked away together, leaving the tree behind, its branches swaying softly in the evening breeze. Yet somewhere beyond the edge of reason and reality, Wonderland waited unchanged, unaging, ready to unfold again whenever a curious mind dared to wander. And though Alice did not look back, she carried it with her always. The end.